Welcome to the Qatar Economic Forum powered by Bloomberg. I'm Jumana Bersachi. Over the next half hour, we'll be showing you highlights from the 5th Annual Forum in Doha. This year's event was held under the theme The Road to 2030, Transforming the Global Economy. Once known primarily as energy suppliers, Gulf nations are rapidly emerging as key centers of financial power, highlighting a profound shift in global capital flows. Sovereign wealth funds such as the Qatar Investment Authority and Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund now act as global financiers, while pro-business reforms have turned the region into a magnet for foreign direct investment. And strategic decisions made in the Gulf increasingly shape global markets. I spoke with Qatari Prime Minister His Excellency Sheikh Hamad bin Abdulrahman Al Thani at the opening of this year's forum. President Trump was in the region last week. It was the first time a U.S. president has paid a visit to Qatar since 2003. How significant was this visit for the Gulf, do you think? And also, how do you think this president, his approach to the region, differs from his predecessors?
Well, I believe that the president visit first trip to the GCC region, visiting Saudi, Qatar, and UAE, has been a great demonstration for the potential of that region. And this sent a very strong message to the entire world that there is a very high potential in that region. This region is flourishing. This region has a lot to do when it comes to contribute to the future technology and the revolution of artificial intelligence and the need for power. Basically, we have had a great visit, and I believe this is equivalent to the rest of the countries in the GCC. During that visit, we had a wide range of topics that's been discussed, whether it's on the regional security, on the future economic cooperation between the two countries, and how to untap the potential between the two countries. These topics actually has varied, whether it's how to partner in artificial intelligence, how to partner in energy, and how to expand also in being a critical and a vital part of the supply chain for the United States economy, which is the leading economy in the world. I believe this was very much perceived in a positive way by the region. And of course, we know that the policy varies from one administration to another. We are glad to see that Middle East and GCC in particular is a priority for this administration, and we believe that there is a lot of potential for both of us in the region and the United States that we can untap in the next few years. And also, I think that one of the key elements of the president's visit is making sure that the situation in this region remain stabilized.
I think it was very important, but it's the beginning of the story, not the end of the story. Syria, for the first time, came to the Arab Summit in Saudi Arabia first, and now attending a summit with Trump. At the same time, they were asked to do a number of things, but the incentive was put up front. In other words, we will reduce or remove sanctions, and we will provide assistance. That being said, all of those who met the Syrians, be them the Arabs or the Americans, though I'm speaking more on the Arab side, want a better Syria. They don't want an extremist Syria. They don't want, frankly, a revisionist Syria either. So the incentive's out there, but there has to be something to be delivered in response.
The PKK has waged almost a 50-year war against Turkey. But last week, they have agreed to disband and disarm. This is also huge because, according to a study, including the opportunity cost, we have wasted almost $1.8 trillion over the past 5 decades combating terror. Now, of course, the peace dividend would be huge in terms of channeling resources to more productive areas for development, for progress. So in that sense, these two developments are going to be huge in terms of geopolitics no longer being a drag, but actually, being a source of leverage.
Do you think there is a chance of Iran also being brought back into the fold?
That's probably a bit over-optimistic, but there's a chance that there could be a nuclear deal that doesn't have some of the shortcomings of the previous nuclear deal that could enable the lifting of sanctions progressively and so forth as confidence is built, and that could lead to them being a more constructive player in the region than they certainly have been for many decades, noting all the damage that has been done by their proxies in this region and still being done by the Houthis, who have still not resolved the issues there. So I think it's an opportunity that all are working as hard as they can to achieve. You can see the narrowing of the differences between the U.S. position and the Iranian position. No enrichment whatsoever is the U.S. opening. Maybe that ends up being for 3 years, and then you have an opportunity to do something smaller. Again, but you can actually see this deal starting to come together.
You think about the market in the LNG side, it's probably growing 1% to 2% compound annual growth. So it's a market that's growing from about 400 or so million tons today to something probably north of 700 million tons over the course of the next decade and beyond. So it's going to take a lot of growth. It's going to take growth in Qatar. It's going to take growth in the United States, the two biggest suppliers in the world, to satisfy the enormous amount of energy growth that's coming. It's going to be power, as His Excellency has talked about, around the whole world, not only in the United States, but around the world as well.
If the U.S. exports more LNG, where does it leave Qatar?
No, I think, we are the biggest supply that's going to come from the U.S. next year. We're going to start our LNG export by the end of this year and really start the full production sometime in the next year. But the first LNG that will come from our Golden Pass LNG, which is the largest single export project in one go that's built in the U.S., is going to have 18 million tons of production. We own 70% of that. So we will be exporters from the U.S. I think the U.S. volumes are going to go to certain markets that are mostly Europe, South America, and our volume will predominantly be serving Asia. That it's difficult for the U.S., I think, to reach, or the entire volume to go to Asia. But in general, I think we need all that volume. It's us, it's the U.S., I think some Australian volume and others to care. You're going to have 1.5 to 2 billion people on this earth in the next 20 to 30 years. And you have 1 billion people around the world that don't have basic electricity. So the need for electricity and power is huge. So we're not worried at all about having a supply glut or anything like that.
Coming up, more from Doha, including Tesla CEO Elon Musk. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the Qatar Economic Forum powered by Bloomberg. Tesla CEO Elon Musk made waves during his appearance on day one of the forum, speaking to Bloomberg's Michelle Hussein. Take a listen.
Tell me then how committed you are to Tesla. Do you see yourself, and are you committed to still being the chief executive of Tesla in 5 years' time?
Yes.
No doubt about that at all?
Well, no, I might die.
Okay, short of that.
I can't be CEO if I'm dead, so there's a slight amount of...
Does that mean that the value of your pay doesn't have any bearing on your decision?
Well, that's not really a subject of discussion in this forum. I think obviously there should be compensation for, if something incredible is done, that compensation should match that something incredible was done. But I'm confident that whatever some activist posing as a judge in Delaware happens to do will not affect the future compensation.
This is the judge who twice struck down the $56 billion pay package that was awarded to you. I think the value on the current value of stock options. Yeah.
Not a judge, not a judge. The activist who is cosplaying a judge in a Halloween costume.
Okay, that's your characterization. I think
Yes.
on the current value of stock options, I think the actual
Justice according to the law.
on the current value of stock options, I think the value of that pay package stands at about $100 billion. Are you saying you are relaxed about the value of your future pay package? Your decision to be committed to Tesla for the next 5 years, as long as you are still with us on this planet, is completely independent of pay?
No.
It's not independent. So pay is a relevant factor then to your commitment to Tesla?
A sufficient voting control such that I cannot be ousted by activist investors is what matters to me. And I've said this publicly many times. But let's not have this whole thing be a discussion of my alleged pay. It's not a money thing. It's a reasonable control thing over the future of the company, especially if we're building millions, potentially billions of humanoid robots. I can't be sitting there and wanting to get tossed out by, for political reasons, by activists. That would be unacceptable. That's all that matters.
One question before we move on to other companies, which is that I wonder if some of what has happened to Tesla in the last few months, did you take it personally?
Yes.
And did it make you regret or think twice about your political endeavors? Because
I did what needed to be done. The violent antibody reaction, and I'm not someone who's ever committed violence, and yet massive violence was committed against my companies. Massive violence was threatened against me. Who are these people? Why would they do that? How wrong can they be? They're on the wrong side of history, and that's an evil thing to do. To go and damage some poor innocent person's car, to threaten to kill me? What's wrong with these people? I've not harmed anyone. So, something needs to be done about them. And a number of them are going to prison, and they deserve it. And more will.
You're referring to the attacks on Tesla showrooms, but I think...
Yeah. Firing bullets into showrooms and burning down cars is unacceptable.
Yeah.
Those people will go to prison, and the people that funded them and organized them will also go to prison. Don't worry.
But wouldn't you...
We're coming for you.
Wouldn't you... But wouldn't you acknowledge that some of the people who turned against Tesla in Europe were upset at your politics, and very few of them would have been violent in any way? They just objected to what they saw you say or do politically.
Well, it's certainly fine to object to political things, but it's not fine to resort to violence and hanging someone in effigy and death threats. That's obviously not okay.
Let's then talk about your new world, your role advising government. You are in this unique and unprecedented position of having billions of dollars worth of contracts with the federal government yourself, mostly through SpaceX, and also now an insider's knowledge of it because of Doge. Can you see that there is a conflict of interest or a potential conflict of interest in broad terms just through that very fact?
I don't think so, actually. There have been many advisors throughout history in the U.S. government and others who have had economic interests. And I am simply an advisor. I don't have formal power. And that's it. The president can choose to accept my advice or not. And that's how it goes.
Critics will say that the U.S. government probably shouldn't be doing deals with entities or government-aligned entities that are also doing business potentially with the Trump organization. What do you think?
We're not. The Trump organization isn't doing business with any government entities. They're doing it with private investors. I mean, many of the people in this room probably know them or have talked about them with that. And so there is a very clear distinction between those things. In the first term, we actually said we're not going to do any foreign deals, even though that's what we did. Yeah. We had done it for years. We just said, hey, we're going to do this. And the reality is it didn't stop the media from constantly saying, you're profiteering anyway. We stopped entirely. Even the deals that were totally legit, it didn't stop the insanity. So this time around we said, hey, we're going to play by the rules, but we're not going to go so far as to stymie our business forever, lock ourselves in a proverbial padded room, because it almost doesn't matter. They're going to hit you no matter what.
How are you thinking about the U.S. as an investment?
Well, look, I mean, the words U.S. exceptionalism are on everybody's lips these days. And, the U.S. has really been preeminent in the world for the last 80 to 100 years based on dynamic economy, respect for the free market system, respect for the rule of law, capital markets, spirit of innovation, many things. Those things haven't gone away. I think that the U.S. is still the destination of choice, and it is the majority of the world economy. It's hard to imagine that it shouldn't be the majority of anyone's investments. Exactly how you turn that into a number, that's where the judgment comes in, and it can't be the subject of an algorithm. The world is going to have to decide whether what I said while we were warming up is that the U.S. is the best place in the world to invest. The question is it still as best as it was? And that's a judgment. Are we as dependable as we always have been?
I think there are kind of 5 factors that have made the U.S. a really exceptional place post-World War II. The first is that we had very strong alliances. The second is very quickly an act from 1950 called the National Science Foundation Act, which, making it short, was just connecting research dollars from universities into the private sector. That has given rise to a lot of the technologies that Rajiv just talked about. Third would be the exorbitant privilege of being the world's reserve currency. Fourth would be rule of law and constitution. And fifth would be demographics, that as a country, we in theory can tap into 7 billion people, whereas China, the world's second largest economy, has a smaller pool to come from. That's historically been true. I think we could argue we're taking all of those out for a little bit of a test drive right now. But ultimately, I think while some of those formidable advantages are bendable, they're probably not breakable. However, I think both things can be true. I think the U.S. can remain exceptional, and I think it's still possible that investors are going to look to allocate marginal dollars elsewhere.
Coming up, more from the Qatar Economic Forum as we discuss how the Gulf is positioning itself to take advantage of the AI revolution. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Doha and the Qatar Economic Forum powered by Bloomberg. I'm Jumana Bersecci. Artificial intelligence has been a consistent theme throughout the discussions on the transformation of global markets. This as the Gulf looks to take center stage as a major data center hub to reap the benefit of the AI revolution.
We're sleepwalking into the disruption.
We're sleepwalking into disruption.
Correct. Because, and the generative AI right now are the large ALM models, OpenAI and others, and that's just the foundation stone, but it is moving fast. If you look at last week's news, Microsoft laid off thousands of software programmers across the globe, India, US, in Seattle. And you would think, if you went back last 5 years, and I am a member of the board of the UPenn advisory board, of the 400 undergrads who came in to study engineering at Penn, 80, 100, 120 would do computer science. Nobody wanted to do mechanical engineering and so on. So, but that's not the issue. Every white-collar job which is process-driven, what generative AI is good at is it has become good at answering questions. It's not good at, you still need Katie to ask the right questions.
That's, by the way, it's what I say to my kids when they go to school every morning. Ask good questions.
Yeah.
Humans still have to do that. I agree with that.
But to give an answer, they have processed every book in the world, every data in the world. So they are 1 million times more information than a human being can ever hold. So they can answer the question. So it now takes weeks to process a mortgage application, an insurance claim, medical claims, even in asset management will get disrupted.
Do you double down as well, as Jeff was alluding to, on data centers and AI, really?
Yeah, I think, I don't believe that the trend on digitization or digitalization will change. And with AI, with DeepSeek, I think the demand for data is just going to continue to grow. The big challenge, at least in Asia, outside of the US, the big challenge is around whether there's going to have enough energy to be able to support the growth. It's not difficult to buy land to build data centers. The question is water, infrastructure, and power. And if you can get that going, and then the next big question is the capital. I mean, Jeff mentioned just now to build a 1 gigawatt of data center, it's going to cost $10 billion.
We're investing a lot in the US, extensively. So we started investing in data centers and some of them in AI, in the AI and hyperscale space about 10 years ago. So when we started originally, we were hesitant really about the asset class. When we developed familiarity after a couple of years, we did deploy in size. I'll tell you, we're very happy with what we've done early because those things are very valuable now. Because when you do things early, you have the ability to negotiate better terms. So you've have access to a lot of assets in the US. Overall, we've invested and have exposure to about 5 gigawatts as a QA. And we've done it systematically with discipline. When it comes to AI, which is the applications on top, we've also been active, both in the hardware, both in the infrastructure software. So we've invested this year a significant ticket, $500 million in Databricks. And also, we've been also active on the application side.
When you think about the power of what AI can do for all companies to reduce costs, potentially to offset whatever tariffs are going to creep into cost increase. I don't know exactly how that offset will work and whether one will come before the other, and that will be a question of whether the consumer can bear it. But if you think about the ability to drive those costs down through efficiencies in these companies, that's why these multiples have stayed so strong across the board. And then you think to yourself, well, which multiples are higher than the others? And you look at just the dichotomy as an example between the US and Europe, and you say to yourself, well, if AI is sort of the equalizer and it can help all companies everywhere, irrespective of whether the AI technology was made in the US or made in Europe, you could really get a benefit from some of those companies around the world. So I think this is exciting across the board. The question is whether inflation creeps in too fast before that.
That's all from the 5th edition of the Qatar Economic Forum. The Qatari government is the underwriter of the Qatar Economic Forum, powered by Bloomberg, and complete interviews from the forum are available at Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Terminal. I'm Jumana Bersachi in Doha, and this is Bloomberg.